How's everybody doing today? Hopefully you're kind of getting used to this new way of doing things for a while at least. One of the things that I have found that helps me is to kind of break my day up a little bit. Segments, maybe a time where you go outside, time where you maybe watch something on TV, YouTube, whatever, and then other times of the day that you set aside to maybe do a little exercise, do some reading, or watch watch a video like this, I guess. But what I thought I'd do today is kind of continue on with our discussion of Ben Sass's book Them and Thomas Friedman's book The World is Flat. So yesterday, what we talked. Oh, by the way, it's St. Patty's Day, so I am wearing my green. If you can see, I don't know how clear it is, but it is one of the few green things that I actually own. My mom was born in Ireland, came to this country when she was 18 in the early 1960s, early to mid 1960s, and actually attended Lyndon Baines Johnson's inauguration, I should say, in 1964 after President Kennedy was shot. So that was right when she came to this country as a special guest because she was an Irish immigrant and came here. And then when I was younger, I don't remember how old I was, but I watched her get sworn in down in New Haven as an American citizen. So that was a significant event in her life, and I remember that. So St. Patty's Day, when I was growing up, when I was little, in Ireland, at least my understanding is that they don't do the corned beef and cabbage. They do more of, it's kind of a big feast, lamb and things like that. And certainly the saint that we're talking about, Patrick, which my first name was credited with bringing Christianity to Ireland and saving the culture in many ways. So certainly a heroic individual in their estimation and things like that. But the other thing that would happen when I was a kid was we would eat mashed potatoes and corned beef, or usually corned beef and cabbage and mashed potatoes, and there would be money hidden in the food. So you'd eat the mashed potatoes. Oh, there's a quarter, which I don't know how wise that would be by today's standards to do that. It is not a tradition I carried on in my family, but as kids, we didn't think so much about the safety aspect of things, and it was kind of fun, and that's one of my memories of it, anyways. So this is a St. Patty's Day that may go down in history just because of what we're dealing with. So you'll be able to tell people in the future what you did, what you did in 2020 on St. Patty's Day. But anyways, let's jump into it. So Ben Sass's book, Them. He's a senator from Nebraska and looked at the challenge and the trouble we're having today, coming together as one, being unified. We have differences of opinions, and people are dividing into two hostile camps, and maybe a way that we can begin to work to bridge that and change that. So the second part of his book, or the second section or chapter, is called Strangers at Work. And this is the idea that people used to belong to a tribe. We used to get a sense that we had a commonality when we worked, and that we belonged to something of a community because of our occupations. Think of names like the Millers, the Coopers, the Smiths. Those names are actually tied to occupations that people have, which I thought was interesting that he brought up. And he also talked about when people were in tribes and saw themselves as a sense of community, there's often a fear that begins to take place when you see that threatened, or changes happen quicker than we can kind of process them. And so one of the things he brought up was this idea of prohibition about 100 years ago. So prohibition, if you remember, was the massive movement in this country to make illegal the manufacture, distribution, and sale of alcohol. So where did that come from? And the thing that people, I think, lose sight of a little bit was that this was actually a constitutional amendment that was passed. So we have kind of talked about that a little bit, but the idea that 3/4 of the states in our country agreed to an amendment to the Constitution banning the manufacture and distribution and sale of alcohol. So it was tremendously popular. It became a disaster in terms of public policy and how to enforce this thing. But what caused it? And one of the big things was that as urbanization happened, as people moved into the cities, unintended or unforeseen consequences happened with overcrowding, poverty, um, despair, and then alcohol thrown into the mix. In some major cities at the turn of the century, 20th century, you could walk into a candy store or a barber shop and get a glass of hard liquor. That's kind of what our society was like. Spousal abuse, alcoholism was rampant, prostitution in some big cities became a major issue at this time. So all of that was tied into this kind of idea of the prohibition movement. Um, even going back to the community aspect of our occupations, part of that was because people stayed in jobs for much longer than they do today. So in the 1970s, if you were the head of a firm, the average amount of time that you would spend in that job was roughly 25 years. Today, in 2020, okay, it's barely 4 years, which is the average. So you can see how this idea of community with our occupations is a challenge. So if I were to ask you what is the number one job in our country right now, you may think for a few minutes and have some guesses. Believe it or not, the number one job in our country, according to SAS, is a driver of some kind. Driving, delivering, doing some of those things. And he brings up the idea of the word car. I don't know if you ever thought of it, because a lot of you do drive cars, or you want to, at least in the near future. The word car is short for carriage. And a carriage is something that needs to be carried or pulled, steered or directed. Okay, a car, short for a carriage. Something that needs to be carried or pulled, steered, and directed. Winston Churchill, to show how this, he was the leader of Great Britain during the World War II era and thereafter. But one of the things, he had trouble with this idea of the car coming into vogue. And when he was told that his chauffeur was waiting for him, he would actually still ask the question, is the coachman upon his box? Going back to the days of horses and carriages. So he refused to kind of go along with the car. He was not ready for that change. Is the coachman upon his box? Is what he would always ask as he was on his way out of the wherever he was. Today we have a fear along those lines, again, changing, threatening our community. We have a fear of driverless cars. Maybe you've watched some things on CNN about how certainly the technology is here. It's not that it's not here yet. The technology is here to have driverless cars. But how soon are they going to take over and become our reality? I still think we are quite a ways from that, but it may be a part of your future, certainly. And you know that 100 years ago, still at least half of the people in our country were farmers. They worked on farms. Think of it this way: 100 years ago, people, more than half of our country maybe, lived the way we're going to live over the next several weeks. We are so used to being in constant contact with people because most of us live in cities and things like that. But over 100 years ago, people didn't see each other a whole lot by our standards today. They maybe worked, farmed, ate dinner together, did things like that, but they weren't out and about. A trip to the city might have been a significant thing every so often. So in a sense, over the next several weeks, we'll be living the way a lot of Americans, maybe most Americans, lived for a good portion of American history. So it's just something to think about when you start to ask yourself, can I really do this? You can, and you will, and people have. So I hope that's encouraging. The other thing that to think about when we look at industry is that changed as we went from farming to cities, and a lot of people were involved in industry and factory work. Think of the Torrington Company, the big building that's over by Carl's True Value. I've mentioned in class before, when I grew up, it seemed like everybody worked there. Everybody's mom, even moms and dads, they all seemed to work there. But between 1945 and 1970, we produced everything we needed in this country for the most part, but also what Western Europe and many European countries needed too, because they were still decimated from World War II. So all of that production, and it was also during those years that our standard of living went through the roof, and we were highly successful economically. But one of the things that SAS brings up that started to stress people out was change in technology, was the ATM, the rise of the ATM machine. So if you think of down by the little theater, we have an ATM machine right near the bank. And people would, maybe a bank employed 21 people, 21 tellers. And on the weekends, on Saturdays or on Thursdays, and I still remember this as a kid, people would wait in line for a long time to get their banking done. And so they really needed to think about how much money am I going to take out for the week? How much am I going to need? Because if they didn't do that, they would have to go back and wait in line for a long time. And you didn't want to do that more than once. And so when the ATM came along, there was a tremendous stress for people in the banking industry. Well, we're going to need less tellers because people can go right up to the ATM, get the money out that they want, and they won't need me anymore. And so the concern was that everything was going to be automated, and the ATMs were going to, while they would help banks and they would help individuals, they would drive tellers out of business. But an interesting thing happened. Actually, the number of tellers needed in the United States went up, and there were actually more tellers in the United States after the invention of the ATM, because what it allowed people to do was, because those big banks didn't have to do all of those services for everybody, it freed a lot of these banks up to open smaller branches, which in turn needed tellers. So the tellers that used to do just mundane tasks now worked in the smaller branches, and found that their jobs were actually more important because they would be advising people on loans and things like that, where prior to that they were just maybe just handing people money over and over again. So that was an unforeseen positive, that the ATM actually increased the number of tellers needed. Think of the branch that we have right in the cafeteria there. That's indicative of that. And so he brings up the fact with the fear that we have today, that people think all these jobs are going to be lost, and we hear that a lot. We hear that in education. We don't even know what you as students are going to do for careers and occupations, because maybe your jobs haven't even been invented yet. But one thing he brings up is, it's not that these jobs really disappear that we have today. They're remade. You have to adjust to them on the fly in your occupation to remake your job. So it's not as scary as you might think. And a lot of people kind of just go off the cliff with that. I remember when I worked at Big Y, when I was your age, when I was in high school, one of my jobs used to be, I used to take all the cans off the shelf and used to have price stickers on them. And so when the price went up or down, I had to go in and remove all the stickers off the cans, the boxes of cereal, and then take my pricing gun and redo the prices. And I used to take a little razor blade, which was kind of sharp, actually, probably not too smart, and I would pull up on the price sticker, and that's the way I would get it done. That's what I would do for 5 or 6 hours each week, changing prices. And then when everything went computerized, that process changed. Now it was a barcode, and all you had to do was put up the new sticker. So my job really didn't change. The way I did it changed. And I think that that'll be kind of a lot of what happens in your future. There will be new occupations, but I think a lot of our jobs will, and SAS brings up this fact, that they'll be remade as opposed to changed completely. The other thing that stresses us out and causes us to maybe react in fear to each other a lot of times is the unknown. Pretty much stresses us out. Right now we're feeling that a little bit. What are the next 6 to 8 weeks going to be like? Or maybe what are the next 2 weeks? What's tomorrow going to be like? And this is new for a lot of us, right? Mary Shelley, when she wrote the book Frankenstein, she purposely did not give the monster a name, because she recognized that people are uncomfortable with that. It's a little scary to have this entity that because when we start to name things, we put ownership over them. When something doesn't have a name, like the monster, it tends to bring another kind of realm of scariness to it, I guess. And so she purposely did that. It's funny today that when we hear Frankenstein, we think of the monster, when actually Frankenstein is the name of the doctor. And that may be reflective of that too. But that is, the minute we name something, we tend to have control over it. And so this idea of how do we stop this thinking where it's us versus them, and this mentality that's going on in our culture, I really appreciate what he does here in the second chapter, because SAS is a Republican senator from Nebraska, but he uses a good deal of part of this chapter to talk about something he appreciates about Chuck Schumer, who is a Democratic leader, the Democratic Party. But he talks about how appreciative he is of listening to Chuck Schumer give speeches concerning high school graduations and things like that about happiness. And Schumer says that the two major things that tend to make people happy and to look for is, are there people waiting for you on a Friday? When you're done with your work week and you're coming home to spend the weekend, are there people there waiting for you, friends, family members, significant others, who value you, who want you to be, to kind of come and spend time with them? That's one part of happiness that's really important. And he said the second part is there meaningful work awaiting you on Monday? Okay, not wealth necessarily, but does a neighbor need me? Am I needed? Is my job significant? Is it something that people value that I can serve my neighbor with? I'm just going to read a quick quote on page 65 from Strangers at Work, the chapter there where it says, "Work is where we build character. Work is where we create value with our lives and lift up our own souls. Work, properly understood, is the sacred practice of offering up our talents for the service of others. This is some important truth. We're made to connect to others. We're created to solve problems, and we can achieve these ends in part through our occupations, our work." And so what you're doing in high school is you're kind of getting ready for that. Some of you are already doing it in your part-time jobs and things like that. But preparing for that meaningful work, they've done study after study, and meaningful work, feeling that your work is valuable, goes a lot farther to make you happy than it does the amount of money that you make. So I think that's significant and something to keep in mind. There's an urban studies theorist, Richard Florida, who talks about Americans in general today. We're oftentimes in one of three categories. We are either mobile, we're either rooted, or we're stuck in terms of who we are as Americans. So the stuck Americans are those that are struggling. Those people who feel stuck in their occupations, in their where they live, their communities. They just feel stuck, and they're so stressed out and overburdened that they really can't make meaningful changes to make our society, better and more cooperative and things like that. The mobile are so busy that they don't have time to really fix the communities that they're part of beyond what they need on a daily basis or short-term basis. Where the rooted individuals are those individuals that are rooted in a community and can do the most really to bring that community, that lack of division that we actually need. So we need more people who are willing to be rooted in this country. And it was kind of funny when I was reading it, because if you know anything that I've shared with you before is, I'm from Torrington. I grew up here. I went to high school. I've been in the same rooms that you were in as a student. I've seen the different people that have come through the school, the names that you see in the basketball court or out on the wall. I knew a lot of them. I know a lot of them today, so stay in touch with them. And so I definitely would tell you that I'm rooted. I know the good, the bad, and the ugly that's gone on in Torrington for all the years I've been alive. And there's a real positive with that, because you get a sense of perspective of community and why what you do matters, and you actually see it impact people's lives. So one of the things that Sass does that's interesting is he is one of maybe the only senators in the United States who commutes to work. So he commutes to Washington from Nebraska, and he brings his family with him, and they educate his kids along the way. I think they travel by train, and so their education takes place on the train a lot of times, because it's so important to him to be rooted and to be part of the community that he represents. He talks about this idea too, that work used to be a noun, now it's a verb. So maybe one thing that'll change in your future is you do several things, and you'll be kind of a conglomeration of those things that you do. So rather than having one career like we have today, maybe you'll be several. You'll do several different things that will kind of make up your income and things that you do well. Maybe you're talented. Some of you, I just know from class that you're very personable. You're good with people. Maybe you're more introverted and you analyze and think through things. Some of you, I've commended you because you're organized. I mean, people always, always need people who are organized. Even people who are administrators. A lot of times they're smart and they have, they can do administration, but sometimes a lot of us struggle with organization. And so we need people alongside of us to help us with that. And the other thing that I think is interesting is a lot of times going back to that fear, we're afraid that robots are going to take over everything. And but think of like a clothing store or even healthcare. You're still going to need a human being to tell you whether that shirt goes with those pants. Whether something looks good on you. Whether in healthcare, you're going to need people that can empathize with you and offer that caring, supportive hand when we're struggling with health issues. So as you can, they talk about care bots, care robots that will bring healthcare to people, but you're still going to need that. There is always going to be a need for that. And so I think that rooted people have more of a tendency to stick things out with people that they may disagree with. So, in growing up in Torrington and continuing to work there, and you get a fondness even for people who you may not see eye to eye with, just because you're living life together. And the more you live life together, the more you realize that there's good in everybody. I can tell you that for sure, even people that you disagree with. So that's another thing I think that is more, as people learn perhaps to invest in community and invest in the places that they're in, maybe not just short term but long term, this division can change, and people can start to have a more cooperative tone with each other. And then finally, I would say that think of periods of time in history. We see it. I think we see it in our country, especially. I was just thinking about the presidencies of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and George W. Bush, and both of those individuals were popular in their own constituency, but were very unpopular with people that disagreed with the direction they were bringing our country. Yet when crisis happened in both of their presidencies, well, FDR came to the office of president after the Great Depression had already initiated, and then George W. Bush during 9/11. Despite people's differences of opinion with them on their policies, you did see a good deal of people rallying around them because a bigger threat was there, a more larger threat. And we as Americans tend to do that when we are challenged with a danger or confronted with a problem. We had a tendency to put aside our differences and come together as a nation. So that's just something positive to think about that might be able to change in the future. All right, shifting gears to Friedman. The world is flat. Just a few things. Some of his, I'll be honest with you, my computers and technology and things like that is not the thing that comes natural to me in terms of reading about them and understanding them. But he brings up 10 forces that flatten the world. So if you remember yesterday, we talked about the world is flat. And really what that means is that we're getting to the point in the world where people have an even playing field. Now, there are still things that get in the way of that, of course. Corrupt governments, racism, discrimination, all sorts of negative things like that. But more and more, because of the advances in technology, our competitors in the world economically are competitors in the world. They're everywhere. And so in the second part of his book, we talked about outsourcing a lot yesterday. In the second part of the book, he said, how did we get here? How did we get where there were the haves, the have-nots, and slowly we see that people around the world are all competing with one another, and the world is flattening. Okay. So what he said, and I'm just going to go over 2 or 3 of these today. The first force that flattened the world was 11/9. Now you're used to hearing 9/11. He goes back to 11/9, November 9th, 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, which had separated East and West Germany. Largely symbolic of the fall of communism in the world. But he talks about it more than that it was really the beginning of open markets, free markets. There was no longer an Eastern or Western way of doing things. The Eastern way of doing things. Today we hear Eastern, we think of China and Asia. when I grew up, and really up until about, I don't know, 10 to 15 years before you were born, when you heard Eastern, it was in the context oftentimes of Europe. So Eastern Europe was totalitarian control of markets, government-run economies, all right, where you had the free West, capitalism. When that wall came down, it now opened up that communist world to capitalism, to the free market, to buying and selling of products. And so with that comes opportunity, comes people living in similar ways, even though they're on different sides of the globe. Think of teenagers in other parts of the world wearing Nike and some of those other things that we often viewed as American companies. You can see that all over the world now. And so the other thing that he talked about was Windows, the invention of Windows on the computer. It allowed millions of people to be the author of their own digital content. When I was in college, I can still remember I would write papers for classes, and I would have to type them on an electric typewriter. So they had a typewriter lab. Think of a computer lab today. There were electric typewriters that you would go in, and they were much easier to use than the old typewriters. You would have to do a paper. You'd have to set the tabs and have the paper initiated just right so your footnotes could look the way that they're supposed to. And if you remember from your paper, with footnoting, it's basically you hit insert and there's the footnote, and you still have a little bit of problems with the spacing at times, but we actually had to adjust that on the electric typewriter to make that work. But think of that change to our world, that flattened the world, that I could actually on a computer now type up what I needed to and send it, which was pretty crazy. And if I wanted to type a paper and send it, I would have to do it by the mail. I would have to, take it out of the typewriter, put it in a mail, say I was going to mail it to a professor. And if I wanted to do that several times over, I would have to do that process over and over and over again. So when you had the computer kind of change things, it was a big deal. And then computers could learn. The other thing that flattened the world was computers learned to communicate with each other in the same company. So instead of having to get up from your desk and walk down 2 flights of stairs to talk to somebody, you could do that now on a computer, which made people much more productive, and the free flow of information was much better. So the first one was the crumbling of the Berlin Wall, and then short time after, the computers that began to come into vogue. The second big force that flattened the world was when the web went around the world and Netscape went public. Okay, the idea of creating, linking, and organizing documents so they could easily be browsed over the internet was created by the British individual named Tim Berners-Lee. Telephones and modems made it possible to connect personal computers now all over the world. I know this is not new information to you because you grew up with this, but this is how it happened. The web, so the World Wide Web, is a term that describes the imaginary space that we use for information, documents, sounds, videos. What we're doing right here, okay, is part of the web. Think of it this way: the internet, okay, is a network, a collection of computers, cables that connect computers. Okay, so I think of it this way: it's like a big office building where all the computers are. That's kind of the internet. But the World Wide Web are like the big warehouses where you store everything that you produce. Okay, if you were to make everything physical, it's like the warehouse that you store everything that you create on the computers. Again, I'm not really, this isn't my area of expertise, but that seems to make sense to me. When the web was created, which debuted in 1991 with HTML as its coding system, within 5 years, it connected 400,000 people to 40 million. And this was able to be done, and information shared instantly in that way. Netscape took off because millions of computers already had a modem, and Netscape added a browser, which really made it more user-friendly. Netscape, so I can remember computers it would have Netscape. I can still remember what it looked like, and you would dial up, you would hit Netscape, your computer would make that noise on the phone, and it would connect you. Netscape was eventually sold to America Online, AOL, for $10 billion, which it never did much with it. And basically, Netscape lost out to Internet Explorer, which was eventually given away by Microsoft and Windows when people bought those. So they went from spending all that money on Netscape to basically Internet Explorer just took over. This led to something called a dot-com bubble, where people understood fiber optic cables became the big thing that would allow computers to connect and telephones to connect, and thereby computers. People really invested everything they had in the fiber optic cables, and the massive amounts of fiber cable that we had available caused the cost of phone calls to plummet. When I was a kid, if you made a long distance phone call, so I think I had relatives in Ireland, that was very expensive. So you get a phone bill, you're like, oh man, I talked to them for 10 minutes on the phone and it cost me, you name the price. And it was expensive. But now, because of fiber optic cables, the cost of telephone calls plummeted. And so you saw the phone industry be impacted by this. The phone company, I think it was, I don't know if it was Bell Telephone or SNET, was located right down next to the YMCA, the building next to the YMCA. And you saw that industry get affected as the internet the phones changed things. And what the fiber optics did is it took data or voice and converted it to light pulses instead of using electronic pulses down copper lines. So the fiber optic were more durable, and it was very difficult to tap a phone. So if you ever watch some old movies, you'll see, the FBI was tapping the phone, where they were listening into phone conversations to get information on criminals and things like that. But that made it much more difficult. And so the capacity of the cables, so they this way, as they laid more and more fiber optic cables to connect phones, to connect devices, it was like a highway where you could drive 50 miles an hour, and then before you knew it, you could drive 70, 90, 150 miles an hour. And so that's how the communication was able to transmit so quickly. So again, another force that flattened the world was the ability to communicate instantly with customers. Think about the customers you could come in contact with, or the markets that you could now get as that was happening. And then the number 3 thing was the workflow software. And so what this did was it allowed people to basically run businesses off their computer. It allowed people to, again, to improve as computers talk to one another. Think of like an organic vitamin company. Friedman brings this up. It pays Yahoo a fee. So when you go to search for organic vitamins, the company would pay Yahoo, say, when a search goes up, I want my product to come up first, okay, or an ad to come up where my product would come up. They pay Yahoo a fee, so anybody that searches for that is going to find it. Okay, it's kind of like if you were to go into like a what are those, like the healthcare, the stores that sell like protein powder, or GNC or something like that. That's space in there. Well, imagine if you had a new vitamin of some sort that you wanted to advertise. They would give you a space in the store where you could set up a display. So you'd walk by and say, oh, wow, I'd like to try that. Maybe I'll buy it. In this case, the workflow software allowed on the internet, the World Wide Web, a place for you to do that digitally. And so it comes up right away because you pay a fee. And then Salesforce.com was a place that essentially was another service that could manage your inventory for you. And then you have another company that might manufacture your vitamin for you. And you would pay all these people to do that, but you would have a profit at the end of the day. You could sell this online without leaving your home. That flattens the world. That means that somebody on the other side of the world can compete with you, which is good. And that means we can compete with people on the other side of the world. So that's what's causing equal opportunity playing field to happen. And so as people learn to program and do those other things, there's just really a limitless opportunity for business to take off. So those are the kind of the nuggets of information for today. Um, the ideas of them, and then the flattening of the world. I think they work. I'm just going to tell you again. I think they work together well, these two books, because one of them is about getting along and learning to invest in each other and in our communities, and the other one is talking about how we have a level playing field in the world, and it's gonna help us to do that anyways and communicate with one another effectively, and stop viewing each other as the enemy, and maybe understand that we've all got ideas to offer each other. So that is it for today. I'm hoping that I'm not boring you too much with these, and that you're getting a little nugget of information each day as we go. And I will continue to do this. I think I told you yesterday, I'm going to be giving you some recommendations for some movies that you might be able to find that you otherwise wouldn't be on your radar screen, that would be worth your time watching. And again, hang in there, have fun, enjoy this. There may not be another time in your life where you actually can take a block of time like this and just enjoy where you are, and learn to fill your time doing some different things. Take care of yourselves. Don't do anything self-destructive with the time. Just really look at it as an opportunity. I miss you guys, and looking forward to at least talking with you digitally tomorrow. And hang in there, and take care.